We here at WKAR exist to serve Mid-Michigan with trusted journalism and local programming. Federal funding has been eliminated, which means community support is critical to sustaining this service and helping WKAR meet evolving community needs. Your ongoing support ensures public media remains freely available and locally focused. Become a sustaining member or upgrade your current gift today. Sustain what matters. Build what's next.
A special state Senate election was held this week. What is the outcome and what is the impact? And a major 16-count criminal indictment revealed by the state attorney general. So sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Studio C. A special election was held this past week. What's it all about and what does it mean? Believe it or not, the New York Times reported on the Democratic victory in Bay, Midland, and Saginaw counties last night, not because it has a ton of readers in that region, but because it reports the Democratic victory could mean alleged bad news for Republicans in the fall. With control of the Michigan Senate hanging in the balance, firefighter and ex-Marine Cedric Green got 59% of the vote, and Republican attorney challenger Jason Tunney got 39%. And both candidates agreed on this. Expensive gas prices at the pump were part of the campaign. And while Governor Whitmer did not mention President Trump by name, she most surely mentioned issues that are directly tied to him, including, quote, skyrocketing gas prices, the high cost of food, housing costs, and health care, which is off the charts. Meanwhile, at the national level, sources from the Democratic Party trumpeted the win in Michigan as bad news for Mr. Trump in the fall. However, State Republican Party Chair Jim Runstead quickly debunked that theory, claiming candidate Tunney was outspent 10-1. And as for the implications for the fall, quote, there was little correlation between special elections and the general election. The victory does mean, however, that Democrats in the Senate maintain control by hanging on to 20 votes. On another front yesterday, local voters did approve 100 revenue issues at the polls while rejecting 23. And in a real cliffhanger, at first, the $99.9 million intermediate school district in Ingham County failed in 3 of the 5 counties. But when the vote from Ingham County came in at the 11th hour, the millage proposal was put over the top. In Grand Ledge, voters rejected 1 bond for fire services but approved several others for public safety. And at the school level, 25 bond issues approved, 14 failed. In all, voters approved yesterday $1.3 billion in new spending and rejected $659 million. So, Beth, the New York Times reporting on this thing up in the thumb. Why?
Well, I mean, I think it's not so much that Green won that special election, but the margin by which he won. It was a very big margin, and I think a lot of people were looking at this election as kind of a bellwether for what to expect in the general. I think Runstead is correct. You can't necessarily predict a general based on a special, but you can see, where your weaknesses are. If he was outspent, then your weakness is probably in money. And it also is in these costs that basically need to go down if Republicans want some kind of win behind them in the general election. Yeah, these elections that lead up to the midterms get a disproportionate amount of attention. If you found yourself reading about a Florida special election for a House seat or perhaps a public service commission in another state, this is sort of Michigan's moment where this is our election that, could have some sway on the midterms, and people are looking at it because they want to read the tea leaves.
I mean, there's an axiom that some data is better than no data, and I mean, that just...
But data is dated.
Yes, and it very well could be by the time, the general election, the next general election comes down. It's just all we've got to look at, which is what makes it so fascinating.
Tim, New York Times covered this because this continues the national narrative over the last 16 months that the Democrats are killing the Republicans in one special election after another, state after state after state, or even where they lose, they are dramatically diminishing their margin of defeat compared to Kamala Harris 2 years ago. So this is part of the narrative the Democrats are establishing, that they are in the ascendancy, that people hate Donald Trump, and they're going to take it out on the Republicans in November. And this is the latest incident, and it's in a swing purple state, Michigan. First evidence here, and it just parallels everything that's happened in every other state. And things, in my opinion, are going to continue just this way right up through and including the general election.
But isn't that the question? Is it that the Democrats are killing the Republicans, or that the Republicans are killing themselves based on what we're seeing in the economy, you know, the war in the Middle East? You know?
All of the above. I mean, Trump's rating is in the toilet, and his popularity is sinking rapidly day by day. And in my opinion, it's going to continue to sink, and the Republicans are going to just take a huge walloping like 2006, like 1974, same old, same old.
But, Bill, the Republicans would argue with you and say, how can you sit there and be a soothsayer and predict that nothing will happen between now and November that could turn this whole thing on a dime? Is that not possible?
What else can they say? That's the best argument.
Well, but it also happens to be part of the truth, they would say.
We don't know if it's the truth. We got 6 months to find out. It looks to me like it's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to get better for Trump. I think it's going to get worse.
All right, well, let's bring this back home. So what does it mean in the state Senate?
Yeah, so the Senate, the Democrats have the majority there. You know, they've been kind of in a pinch of late with down a seat, and they face a very real possibility that there could be a tie in the Senate. So I think they're breathing a little easier there, at least for the next 6 months.
They have 20 votes, which is what they need to pass stuff.
2018 doesn't make any difference procedurally. I served in a tied 1919 legislature and Senate. I got to tell you, procedurally, between now and the end of the year, it's going to mean absolutely nothing that Chedrick Green
Well, they made sure that Jim Brickley was on life support.
Well, look,
he was lieutenant governor at the time.
Yes, yeah. All the one party has to do is withhold a vote. It'll never get to a tie-breaking vote. The key thing that's happened in the last 2 years is Republicans took control of the House. Doesn't make any difference what the Senate does. The House can stop it if they want to. Once that happened,
you'll get letters
everything.
on that, man.
No, I think Bill's right there that the Senate has, you know, a very narrow majority, and the thing that can stop a lot in Lansing right now, as we have seen over the past year and a half, is Speaker Matt Hall in the House.
Exactly.
And it's a piece that's always going to be there for the next 6 months.
What about all these millages? Is there a tax revolt out there, Ricky?
I mean, cost of living is what everybody is talking about. And even when you look at sort of, you know, the existential questions that are posed by, you know, the war in Iran, that still comes back to the cost of fuel, the cost of fertilizer for, you know.
But most of these passed. Okay, if cost of living is so bad and I got a chance to vote no on a bonding issue, I'm going to vote no.
Well, every district is different. But still, I think that there were enough no votes out there that, you know, people are focused on cost of living.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different too, and something that's not in front of your face every day. I mean, you know, when I have a millage, it gets added to my tax bill, and I slowly don't notice. But I do think that that's a lot different than going to the pump once a week, twice a week, and saying, "Oh shoot, I'm paying a lot more for the same product." With a millage, you could be voting for something improved, better public services. I think it's a little different.
What do you make of the vote? Tax revolt or not?
I think it's hard to say when it's a May election. You know, you get a very low turnout at May elections.
That's a great point.
You know, skeptics would say that's why they have it in May and not in a different month. But so I think it's difficult to kind of read the tea leaves of that. But yeah, a good number of them passed, and I think it's interesting, but also it's difficult to draw very firm conclusions with it being a May
let me just
election.
answer my own question. If you look at the polling data, okay.
Is that what happens when you don't
I'm
like
sorry.
any of our answers?
Go ahead.
I guess I'm not supposed to do that. If you look at the polling data and ask the people what's the number one issue, down near the bottom, number 9, number 10, number 11 is taxes. Okay, so the days of Bob Tisch running around the state and beating this horn, he was an anti-taxer, okay, who had a number of ballot proposals. I just don't think it's alive and well out there, depending on the district. Do I get an amen from anybody?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point, that it's different circumstances. It's a low turnout election. It's a very, very local issue. And, depending on what the purpose is for, if you can explain it to people, they can see, they can do a cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, anytime you see the money staying home and it's in a fire truck, you say, yeah, that was worth it, right? Okay.
Yeah, and I think evidence of that is how much, the House, the Senate, and the governor are focusing on property taxes right now, right? At the state level, it's pretty understandable I think people are focusing on that state level tax and what's happening with it, whereas I feel like they probably think they have more control over how a local tax is managed and divided.
These proposals have been doing pretty well at the local level over the last few years. And I think it's showing up in the way people voted now. I mean, they trust their local units of government a heck of a lot more than they do the people in Lansing. And they're supportive.
All right, so let's look at the U.S. Senate race on the Democratic primary, which is also getting a lot of national attention. Major endorsement this week. Is it a so what moment or not?
Well, depends on what you think of endorsements generally. But yeah, Debbie Stabenow, obviously a long time and very popular former U.S. Senator from Michigan, has endorsed in the race for Haley Stevens, who's the current sitting Congresswoman who is running for U.S. Senate. So, certainly they would have worked together while in Congress, and I think that is an interesting pickup for her. And I think
I thought that Debbie Stabenow was going to stay out of this. Que pasa?
Well, I think some of the other candidates thought that too. I mean, I think the response from Senator Mallory McMorrow, who was in the race, was interesting when she basically said, this is Chuck Schumer putting Stabenow up to it. And
this is the Senate Republican leader in Washington.
Senate Democratic.
Democratic
yes,
leader, yeah.
That she said, I think this is Chuck Schumer kind of trying to control the race through Debbie Stabenow, and that was an interesting allegation.
If I may piggyback, I just said I'm going to piggyback because Ms. McMorrow has said, what about Chuck Schumer? She wants him out. So this is paybacks, maybe? Yes, no?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, look, be careful what you wish for, Chuck Schumer, because I'm not convinced Haley Stevens is the best candidate the Democrats.
Well, Debbie Stabenow, she's the one that can beat Mike Rogers.
Well, maybe she's saying it, as Beth implied, because Chuck Schumer leaned on her to say it. I'm just saying it may be a bad choice because I think probably McMorrow would be a better general election candidate for the Democrats than Haley Stevens. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see what happens.
Sorry. I was going to say this is some needed momentum, I think, for Haley Stevens. I think her fundraising report last quarter did not come in like probably she would have wanted. She had a little bit of an awkward answer at the first debate the Council of Black Pastors hosted on her APAC acceptance, kind of deferring away from that. And so I think that this could be a good momentum injection for her team.
It could be, but what does an endorsement from Debbie Stabenow bring at this point? I mean, she doesn't really have a campaign organization anymore. Obviously, she has some gravitas, but is there? I mean, it may bring some momentum.
She may have a mailing list.
Okay, I mean, fair enough, but a mailing list only works if, well, I shouldn't say it only works, but also requires some follow-up. So what kind of organizational support, what kind of institutional support does a Stabenow endorsement bring? And is it enough to really change the trajectory?
Progressives are very strong against or for Mr. El-Sayed, but are there enough of them?
Oh, it's a good question. Are there enough of them, and will they show up in August? And I think El-Sayed has done a very good job in recruiting young people to his campaign. Some of those college students, and during an August primary, it is, I would imagine, more difficult to get college students to the polls if they're not on campus. And so I think that
most of them aren't.
Right.
Right. And I mean, I imagine El Sayed has anticipated that hurdle and is working to address it, but it is a real concern about having an August primary in that sense.
Yeah. All right, let's turn the page to your story. The Detroit News has been working on now for 2 years, Beth?
A little bit longer than that.
Yeah, okay. The Attorney General did what this week?
This week she charged Faye Baydoun, a Metro Detroit businesswoman and a Democratic fundraiser, with 16 counts related to her spending of a $20 million state grant that she received in 2022. And she alleged that she used this grant, which was supposed to be meant for a business accelerator program for expenses like Tunisian rugs, a lease that led to a vacant lot, and a legal invoice that the Attorney General's office is alleging is forged. So it definitely created a lot of waves in terms of like how that grant process works and the controls over how it's spent. I think some unanswered questions still that prompted a lot of questions from the affidavit was how Baydoun got that grant in the first place. There's been a lot of finger pointing about who's responsible, and I don't know that we're to the bottom of it yet of how she came to get it.
Yeah, I mean, this is, the charges are filed, and Baydoun and Baydoun's legal counsel are, as Beth has reported, pushing back ferociously.
They're countersuing.
On this. And so, there are still a lot of shoes to drop. Once discovery begins, they seem to think that Baydoun's legal team seems to think either that they have a case or maybe that they have a negotiating position to work on countering these charges. But it's interesting that they're pushing back now in somewhat more specific ways. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
And this is potentially embarrassing for the Whitmer administration. I mean, the MEDC is notoriously this sort of quasi-governmental entity, and of course they didn't originate this grant. But best reporting has already changed some of the processes in the state legislature. We have a more transparent process now for some of the earmarks that people pursue, and it's easier to tell where these kinds of things are coming from. But I am kind of curious to see how far this gets into the Whitmer administration, and whether potentially that ends up being a little embarrassing for them.
She's put a lot on, Governor Whitmer's put a lot on the line to, try and keep the MEDC functioning, largely as is. And Attorney General Dana Nessel has said that going after the leadership of the MEDC is not off the table.
Well, all of the above. You're all right, absolutely. The MEDC is an abomination. And every candidate has said, even if they would keep it, like Mike Duggan says, the independent candidate for governor, he said, I would dramatically restructure it and change it the way it operates. So it's been a disaster from the beginning. And Faye Baydoun, I'm kind of amazed it took 2 years to get to this point where these felony charges come down against her. I mean, God, it was like silence after the initial flurry of charges were launched, 2 years ago. Now, finally, as you say, shoe drops, this one, and we're going to find out going forward what happens. But I think the Whitmer administration ought to be extremely embarrassed about this.
This is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the creation of John Engler, when he was governor. So when did this thing get sideways? Because nobody was griping about this thing under the Engler administration.
Well, there was there's always controversy about whether the state...
Corporate welfare, I've heard that 1,000 times.
There were no scandals. There were no scandals. I mean, this was the scandal waiting to happen under this structure. It just took a long time to happen.
And that's the thing. Like, I know there have been a lot of calls for either abolishment or guardrails. I mean, if I want a cat, I don't buy a dog and ask it to meow, right? Like, I feel like the MEDC...
There's the quote of the day.
the MEDC was set up to give, it is not a regular government unit. It is set up to give money to private corporations 9 times out of 10. And so it's difficult to put the guardrails that you would put in that you would see in other agencies, because you're working with private corporations, which require NDAs, which require. Now, there's still probably a lot of room for guardrails, and I think Attorney General has pointed that out. But like, how far do you get on putting in guardrails before you run up against the fact that you're dealing with private agencies, that you're giving money to private corporations? There are parts of this that are going to be really difficult in reforming that agency.
Did she have a relationship with the MEDC?
Beydoun? Yes, she was on the executive committee for the MEDC. And that's, I mean, there's so many dynamics at play with this grant and what went wrong with it. One of them is that at the time Beydoun received the grant, which was administered through the MEDC, she was on the executive committee, and emails and witness statements show that she was basically lobbying the MEDC for this money while she was on the executive committee. So there's, I mean, the layers to this are replete, and I don't think we've even seen all of them yet.
Yeah, also, I mean, the money was for something called a business accelerator, which is kind of, a nebulous concept that I mean, I looked up, what they are, but they can be seed money, grants, mentorship, just helping businesses build relationships, that there's not sort of a hard line definition of what this entity is supposed to be.
All right, let's talk about Twitter. Zuba was on the show, the pollster, a couple of weeks ago, and he made an interesting point that a lot of people are playing this game from a political point of view in campaigns, thinking that social media is the magic elixir to get you elected. Let's see what this story's about.
It seems like Governor Gretchen Whitmer is flooding every possible social media platform, including Facebook, to get her message out to over 127,000 avid readers. She also has one part of her team devoted to social media postings. To be sure, she's not alone, as other politicians are also basically still using mainstream media for interviews and advertising, but more increasingly, they are looking to the social media to get their messages out. And at the recent state Democratic convention, the buzz was that the progressive wing of the party had used social media to gin up support for U.S. Senate candidate Abdul El-Sayed, and they claim it worked. But this veteran pollster warns that social media, well, it may not be what it's cracked up to be.
Only 18% of the state said they are even on Twitter, and only 4% said they use Twitter a lot. And I think there's a whole lot of people who think campaigns are won and lost on Twitter. And that's not the case.
Researchers have found that younger voters do not vote in the same numbers as those, well, you know who.
Lose primary elections by talking to older voters who dominate the August primary.
And suffice it to say, seniors are not spending hours, countless hours every day on social media. On another front, the conflict in the Middle East is in the media every day. But reportedly, there's another misconception at play over this issue. Mr. Zuba discovered by talking to Democrats, the Middle East, well, it's not what you think it is.
There was not one respondent in that Democratic survey that said Gaza, Israel, or the Middle East. It is about prices and affordability. Clear and simple. This is not even close. This is going to be decided on the economy. Plain and simple.
To be sure, the Middle East story is having an impact on voters, but not because of the war per se, but because of the impact at the pump and the pocketbook.
Mr. Pluta, is Mr. Zuba correct?
Well, he's a professional pollster, and I am not, but he is pretty good at his job. And
is that a yes?
Sure. But, I mean, this raises an interesting point, especially on the social media aspect of it. And, I mean, look at Governor Whitmer, who's got a very strong social media game.
Strong?
Yeah.
She's got people on the staff that are
that's right. That's their job.
Yeah.
But how much is social media a means for communicating, with younger voters, with the public at large, messaging, versus an opportunity to screw up? Like, remember the Doritos communion video.
Yeah.
I mean they had to back off that really, really quick, and they're spending a lot more time with posts on the dogs than trying to be edgy.
Tim, two things. First of all, social media probably works more with people who are delegates to a Democratic state convention where El Sayed and the progressives were very strong than it does in the general election or in a primary, a Democratic primary. Linking that back to what Beth said, Zuba is right, absolutely. The people who are going to participate are older voters, and they're not big on social media. They're not really paying much attention to that. They're not getting the stuff on Gaza and everything else.
It's not their source of news.
It's not their source of news. And so people who are concentrating so heavily and hoping it translates into votes on social media are probably missing the boat. And he said, by the way, Zuba, that's why Haley Stevens is doing as well as she is, because she's got more of a connection with older voters than the other two candidates.
But there's a euphoria in the younger generation about this stuff, that this is the magic elixir.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of all of the above, right? I think any candidate would be misplacing their efforts if they didn't look at every contingent of the population in terms of who they're approaching, right? So you do have to have a social media presence. You do have to have a traditional media presence as well. But I think you break through wherever you can. And I wouldn't discount the role of social media completely, because McMorrow, she sort of went viral for a speech that she gave on the Senate floor that got picked up. It does advance you through the Democratic ranks, but I think it would be unwise to put your trust in it completely.
Somebody the other day described it like cotton candy. But I don't know if I digress there. What's your take on this, Emily, before we put the ribbon on this?
Well, I'm not sure which dessert I would compare it to, but I do think that, an important thing about social media is how algorithmically controlled it is, right? So I could open my Facebook feed or my Instagram feed or my Twitter feed, and it could be entirely different than yours. And I think it sort of promotes the sort of echo chambers that can elevate a candidate.
And on that note, thank you all for showing up and for giving us a great half hour of analysis and commentary. Next week, more of the same right here on Off the Record. Thanks for tuning in.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.